They said the truth had been buried for 20 years, and no one ever went back to look for it. But one day, a veteran Navy SEAL and his dog stepped into a forest that refused to forget. What they found wasn't just an abandoned ambulance. It was a lie, powerful enough to destroy a life. A missing child, a woman blamed for everything, and a town that chose silence over justice. Yet the dog didn't follow commands. It followed something deeper, something that refused to stay buried. And step by step, they uncovered a truth someone was still trying to protect. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Veteran Dog Stories. The forest welcomed them the way only old places could, without asking questions, without remembering names, and without caring who a man used to be before he arrived. Morning light spilled through the towering pines in long golden shafts, drifting like quiet smoke between branches that had stood longer than memory. It was the kind of place people described as peaceful, but peace here felt different. It wasn't gentle. It was indifferent. The forest did not soothe. It simply existed, vast and patient, waiting for whatever chose to walk into it. Silas Wren moved through it with the slow, deliberate rhythm of someone who knew better than to rush. At 43, his body still carried the discipline of a Navy SEAL. Broad shoulders, controlled movements, strength that never needed to prove itself. His olive field jacket brushed softly against low branches, the fabric worn at the cuffs, like it had lived as many lives as he had. Beneath it, the red and dark blue plaid shirt sat slightly unbuttoned at the collar, a small rebellion against the precision that once defined him. His boots pressed into the forest floor with quiet certainty, every step measured. Not cautious, not afraid, just aware. Beside him, Rook moved like a shadow that had learned how to breathe. The German Shepherd K9 was in his prime, 5, maybe 6 years old. His black and tan coat dense and clean despite days on the road. His build was perfect balance, muscle without bulk, speed without waste. Every movement served a purpose. His ears twitched at sounds too subtle for human ears, and his amber eyes never rested in one place for long. Rook didn't just see the forest, he read it. Silas stopped near the edge of a small clearing where sunlight pooled like water. He set his pack down, a weathered Eberly stock half-track, and rolled his shoulders slightly, feeling the quiet pull of old injuries that never quite left him. The air smelled clean, pine sap, damp earth, wind, a good place to rest. They had been moving for days, drifting north without a fixed destination. That was how Silas lived now, not running, but never staying. Staying meant attachments. Attachments meant wait, and wait got people killed. He glanced at Rook. Here's fine. Rook didn't sit. He didn't relax. He didn't even look at Silas. Instead, the dog stood still, completely still, his body angled toward the tree line beyond the clearing, his ears lifted. His nose twitched once, twice, and then held. Silas frowned slightly. That wasn't hunting behavior. That wasn't curiosity. That was recognition. Rook took a step forward, then another. Then he stopped again. Not because he was unsure, because he was deciding. Silas watched him closely, something tightening just behind his ribs. You smell something? Rook didn't respond. He never did in ways people expected. But his tail remained low, not relaxed, not aggressive, focused. Then he turned his head, just slightly, toward a narrow break in the trees. Not a trail, not anymore. It looked like something that used to be a path before the forest reclaimed it. Branches tangled across it, ground uneven, the faint memory of direction buried under years of neglect. Silas followed the line with his eyes. Then he sighed quietly. Yeah, I know that look. He reached down, clipped a light lead onto Rook's collar, though he knew he wouldn't need it. The dog wasn't pulling. He wasn't chasing. He was guiding. And for reasons Silas couldn't explain, not logically, not cleanly, he let him. They moved off the clearing and into the forgotten stretch of forest. The ground shifted underfoot, softer, less traveled. Moss thickened over fallen branches, and the air cooled as the canopy above tightened, letting less light through. The further they went, the quieter it became. Not in a peaceful way, but in the way places grow quiet when they've been left alone too long. Silas noticed the slope first, subtle but present. The land dipped downward, the soil darker, heavier. Years ago, maybe decades, something had happened here. A landslide, maybe, enough to reshape the terrain, to erase whatever path had once existed. No hikers came this way, no rangers either, which meant whatever lay ahead had been left alone. Rook slowed, then stopped. His body stiffened, not in fear, but in something deeper. Familiarity. Silas felt it then too, that quiet shift in the air, not sound, not smell, just wrongness. He stepped forward, pushing aside a low-hanging branch, and saw it. At first, it didn't look like anything, just shapes, metal tangled in roots, a curve of something pale beneath layers of dirt and vine. Trees growing too close together, as if they had decided to hide something instead of make space for it. Then his eyes adjusted, and the shape became real. An ambulance. Old, half swallowed by the forest, one side sunken into the earth, the tires gone flat long ago. Rust crawled across the body like a slow disease, and vines had claimed the doors, wrapping them in green fingers that held tighter with every passing season. The faded outline of a red cross still clung to the side. Silas didn't move. Neither did Rook. For a long moment, the world narrowed to that single, impossible thing. What the hell? Silas stepped closer. The ground squelched faintly under his boot, moist, untouched. No recent tracks, no sign anyone had been here in years. He reached the rear doors. One hung slightly ajar, held shut only by rust and pressure. He hesitated, not out of fear, out of instinct. Then he pulled. The door gave with a long, dry creak. Inside, the air was stale, trapped, unmoving. The smell of old plastic, metal, and something faintly chemical lingered beneath the years. The interior had been stripped of anything useful. No equipment, no supplies. Just the skeletal frame of what used to be. But not everything was gone. Silas stepped in slightly, ducking his head. That's when he saw it. On the inside of the rear window. A handprint. Small, faint, pressed from the inside out. Silas froze. Not a smudge, not dirt. A hand. A child's hand. His jaw tightened. He looked down. The stretcher rails along the floor bore deep, jagged scratches, too uneven to be tools, too frantic to be accidental, like something, or someone, had tried to hold on, and then hadn't. Rook let out a low, almost inaudible sound. Not a growl, not a bark. Something closer to recognition. Silas turned sharply. The dog wasn't looking at the handprint. He was staring at the far corner of the ambulance floor. There was nothing there, at least nothing obvious. Silas stepped closer, crouching. For a moment he saw nothing but dust and shadow. Then a faint indentation, as if something small had once been dragged and then lifted. Rook stepped forward, stopped, and refused to go any further. Silas felt something cold settle deep in his chest. Not fear, something worse. A memory he didn't own, but somehow understood. Silas exhaled slowly, forcing his mind back into focus. Okay. He scanned the interior again. That's when he noticed it. Half hidden beneath a rusted bracket near the wall, a thin plastic band. He reached for it carefully. It snapped slightly as he pulled it free, brittle with age. A hospital wristband. Child-sized, faded nearly white, but not gone. Silas turned it, angling it toward the light. Letters emerged slowly. E-L-I. His throat tightened. Morrow. He said it out loud. Not because he needed to, because silence suddenly felt too heavy. Eli Morrow. The name hung in the air as if the forest itself had been waiting to hear it spoken again. Silas closed his hand around the band. Behind him, Rook had stepped back just a few inches, but enough to notice. The dog's ears tilted slightly, his body lowering just a fraction. Not submission, not fear. Caution. The kind that came from knowing something about this place. That Silas didn't. Silas stepped out of the ambulance slowly. The forest felt different now. Not brighter, not darker, just aware. He moved around the vehicle, scanning the ground. Years of decay had erased most obvious signs, but not everything. Near the base of a nearby tree, the soil looked uneven, disturbed long ago, but not naturally. Silas crouched, brushing away leaves and loose dirt. His fingers struck metal. A dull, hollow sound. He dug carefully, uncovering a small tin box, dented and stained by time. He opened it. Inside, a photograph, faded but intact. A young woman in medical scrubs stood beside the ambulance, her arm wrapped protectively around a small boy, no older than 6. Her face was determined, but her eyes, afraid. The boy looked straight at the camera. Alive, present, real. Silas turned the photo over. The handwriting on the back was uneven, rushed, like it had been written with shaking hands. He read it once, then again, and this time, he didn't breathe. I didn't leave him. Don't believe them. Silas looked up. The forest stood silent around him, unmoving, unforgiving. Behind him, Rook sat down slowly, not because he was tired, because he had found what he was looking for, and whatever it was had just begun. The town did not welcome strangers. It tolerated them. Silas noticed that the moment he crossed the narrow wooden bridge that marked the edge of it, the road shifted from gravel to cracked asphalt, and the forest pulled back just enough to reveal a handful of buildings, low, worn, and sun-faded. A diner with chipped paint. A gas station that looked like it had stopped evolving sometime in the late 90s. A general store with a crooked sign that read, Pine Hollow Supply. Everything felt paused. Not abandoned, just unwilling to move forward. Silas parked his truck near the diner. The engine ticked softly as it cooled. The only sound that felt alive in the stillness. Rook sat in the passenger seat for a moment longer than usual, his eyes scanning the street, ears flicking at sounds too faint for human notice. Yeah, Silas muttered under his breath. I feel it too. Rook stepped out of the truck, landing silently on the pavement. His posture shifted the moment his paws touched ground, no longer just alert, but measured. Evaluating. Silas adjusted the strap of his pack and walked toward the diner. Inside, the air smelled of coffee, grease, and thyme. A bell above the door chimed faintly as he entered, and for a split second, every conversation in the room paused. Not dramatically, not obviously, but enough. Enough for him to know. A woman stood behind the counter, wiping down a surface that was already clean. She was in her late 60s, maybe early 70s, with a soft frame and silver hair pulled into a loose bun. Her name tag read Mabel. Her eyes were kind, but careful. "Morning?" she said, her voice warm in tone but measured in delivery. Silas nodded once. "Morning." He took a seat at the counter. Rook settled beside him, lying down but not relaxing fully, his head resting on his paws while his eyes remained open, watching. Mabel poured coffee without asking. "Passing through?" she asked. Silas wrapped his hands around the mug, letting the warmth settle into his palms. "Something like that." She nodded, as if that answer fit into a category she'd heard many times before. Silas took a sip, then set the mug down gently. "There's an old ambulance out in the forest," he said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't push. He just placed the words into the room like a stone dropped into still water. The ripple was immediate. Not loud, but unmistakable. A man at the far booth stopped mid-bite. Another lowered his newspaper without looking up. Mabel's hand paused, just for a second, before continuing its slow, careful motion across the counter. No one spoke. No one reacted. And yet, everything had changed. Silas watched her. "Didn't expect that kind of silence," he added quietly. Mabel sighed, setting the cloth aside. She leaned on the counter slightly, her shoulders lowering just a fraction. "That forest takes things," she said. "Sometimes it gives them back." Silas didn't respond. He let the words sit. "Where exactly did you find it?" she asked. "Off any trail worth mentioning," Silas said. "Looks like the land shifted. Like nobody's been out there in a long time." Mabel nodded once. "That'd be the North Ridge," she said. "Used to be a path out there. Washed out after a bad season. Rangers stopped going through after that." Silas glanced down at Rook. The dog hadn't moved, but his ears had shifted, just slightly, toward the door. Listening, always listening. The bell chimed again. A woman stepped in, carrying the scent of pine and cold air with her. She moved with purpose. Mid-30s, athletic build, not tall but grounded. Her jacket was forest green, marked with the insignia of a state ranger. Her brown hair was pulled into a low tie, strands escaping in a way that suggested she didn't spend time worrying about appearances. Her eyes moved quickly across the room, sharp, observant. She noticed Silas. She noticed Rook. And then she walked straight toward them. "You're the one asking about the ambulance," she said. It wasn't a question. Silas met her gaze. "Might be." She studied him for a moment longer, then extended a hand. "Mara Bellamy, Forest Service." Silas shook it. Silas Wren. Her grip was firm, practical. She glanced down at Rook. "Working dog?" "K9, Silas said. Rook lifted his head slightly, meeting her eyes, not aggressive, not submissive, acknowledging. Mara nodded. "Figures." She pulled out the stool beside him, but didn't sit immediately. Instead, she rested her hand on the counter, leaning slightly forward. "That area you went into, it's not just off the trail," she said. "It's off the map. Landslide about 15 years back cut it off from the main search grid. After that, it stopped being part of routine patrol." Silas frowned slightly. "Search grid for what?" Mara didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at Mabel. Mabel looked down. That was answer enough. Mara finally sat. "There was a case," she said. "Long time ago. Kid went missing. Ambulance involved." Silas didn't blink. "Name?" Mara hesitated. Before she could answer, the door opened again. This time, the man who entered carried authority without needing to show it. Sheriff Nolan Pierce was a tall man, broad in the shoulders, though age had softened the edges. His face was lined, not just from time, but from responsibility. The kind of man who had made too many decisions that didn't have clean endings. His brown hair was streaked with gray, cut short. His uniform jacket hung heavy on him, like it carried more than just a badge. He stepped inside, took in the room, and his eyes landed on Silas. Then on Rook. Then on Mara. "Morning," he said. No one replied. Nolan walked over slowly, resting his hand on the back of a chair before sitting down across from Silas. "You found something out there," he said. Again, not a question. Silas nodded once. "Ambulance," he said. "Child's wristband inside. Name's Eli Morrow." Nolan's jaw tightened, just slightly. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That name hasn't been spoken much around here." Silas leaned back just a fraction. "Why?" Nolan exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand across his face. "Because it didn't end right," he said. He looked at Mara, then back at Silas. 20 years ago, a boy disappeared. Eli Morrow. Last seen in the back of an ambulance with a nurse named Hannah Vale. They were supposed to be transporting him to a hospital out of county. He paused. The ambulance never arrived. Silas didn't interrupt. They found nothing. No wreck, no bodies, no road signs of an accident. Just gone. "And the nurse?" Silas asked. Nolan's expression hardened. "She vanished too," he said. "Official story says she took the kid. Ran." Silas tilted his head slightly. "You believe that?" Nolan didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced down at Rook. The dog had shifted again, not tense, but focused. His eyes weren't on Nolan. They were fixed on something outside the diner window. Rook rose to his feet in one smooth motion. No bark, no warning, just movement. His body angled toward the glass, ears forward, muscles tightening, not for attack but for recognition. Silas turned instinctively, following the dog's line of sight. Across the street, parked near the edge of the lot, sat an old pickup truck. Rust creeping along the edges, driver's seat empty. Nothing unusual, except... Rook took one step forward, then stopped, refused to go further. A low sound built in his chest. Not fear, not aggression, memory. Silas felt it then, that quiet, cold certainty. Whatever Rook was sensing, it wasn't new. Nolan followed his gaze. "That truck belongs to Gideon Crow," he said. Silas glanced back. "Who's that?" "Used to run the mechanical shop out here," Nolan said. "Keeps to himself now." Mara frowned slightly. "He's been here longer than most," she added. "Knows the old roads better than anyone." Silas looked back at the truck, then at Rook. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think my dog knows him too." Nolan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Your dog's never been here before?" Silas didn't respond, because that wasn't what this felt like. Not familiarity of place, familiarity of scent, of something that had once been part of the same story. Nolan leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Listen," he said. "You go digging into this. You're not just stirring up old rumors. You're pulling at something people here chose to leave alone. Silas met his gaze. "I don't leave things alone just because they're buried," he said. Mara studied him for a moment, then nodded, almost to herself. Nolan sighed. "Figures," he muttered. The conversation ended there, not because it was finished, but because it had crossed a line. Silas stood, setting a few bills on the counter. "Appreciate the coffee," he said. Mabel nodded, but didn't smile. Rook moved with him, but as they stepped outside, the dog slowed. He turned his head once more, toward the truck, then toward the road beyond it, as if tracking something that had already moved on. Silas followed his gaze. The street was empty, too empty. He exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he said under his breath. "We're not the only ones looking anymore." That night, the town settled into silence early. Lights went out one by one, leaving only a few dim glows behind drawn curtains. Silas stayed in a small roadside room, nothing more than a bed, a chair, and a window that looked out over the parking lot. Rook lay near the door, not sleeping, never fully. Silas sat on the edge of the bed, turning the wristband in his fingers. Eli Morrow, a name that had survived 20 years of silence. He leaned back slightly, staring at the ceiling. "This isn't just a missing person," he murmured. Rook didn't respond, but his ears lifted. A sound. Outside. Soft. Measured. Silas stood without a word and moved toward the window. He pulled the curtain aside just enough to look out. At first, nothing. Then, a shape. At the far edge of the lot, standing just beyond the reach of the streetlight, not moving, watching. Silas's breath slowed. The figure didn't approach, didn't hide, just stood there, like it knew he would see it. And then, it turned and walked away into the darkness, gone before Silas could react. He stood there for a long moment. Then, let the curtain fall. Behind him, Rook had risen. Silent, alert, waiting. Silas didn't sit back down. "Yeah," he said quietly. "This wasn't buried." He looked at the door, then back at the window. "They've just been waiting." Morning came pale and cool over Pine Hollow, the kind of northern light that made even an ordinary roadside motel window look honest. Silas had not slept much. He had spent most of the night half awake, listening to the old building settle, listening to Rook's breathing near the door, listening to his own mind circle the same hard fact without mercy. If Hannah Vale had been lied about, then somebody in that town had helped the lie survive. By sunrise, he was already outside. Rook stood beside the truck, alert and composed, his black and tan coat catching threads of gold light. The dog's posture looked different from the day before. Not agitated, not restless, but narrowed, focused. Like a soldier who had seen the outline of a battlefield before the others understood where they were standing. Mara Bellamy arrived a few minutes later in a Forest Service vehicle dusted with mud along the tires and lower doors. She stepped out with the same quiet purpose she seemed to carry into everything. In daylight, Silas noticed more about her. She was in her mid-30s, lean and strong in the practical way of people who worked outdoors instead of paying to imitate it. Her brown hair was tied low at the nape of her neck, and her face carried that plain, unguarded kind of beauty that came more from steadiness than softness. She wore a moss-green ranger jacket over a gray sweater, charcoal field pants, and waterproof boots scarred by rock and weather. There was no theatrical toughness in her. She simply looked like a woman who had learned long ago that panic solved nothing in the woods. "You look terrible," she said as she approached. Silas opened the driver's side door. "Good morning to you too." That drew the faintest curve at the corner of her mouth. Didn't sleep? Not enough. Same, Mara said. I checked some old terrain records before dawn. The northern ridge really was cut off after a heavy spring slide. Search teams stopped short of that zone because the slope became unstable. On paper, it makes sense. On paper, Silas repeated. She nodded once. In real life, it leaves room for a lot of things to disappear. That line sat between them for a moment. Rook jumped into the truck bed on command, then shifted restlessly before settling. Silas noticed it. The dog wanted the woods again. Whatever waited out there had gotten under his skin. The drive back took less than half an hour, but the forest seemed altered now that they knew what lay inside it. Yesterday, it had looked beautiful. Today, it looked watchful. The same bright pines, the same shafts of light through the branches, the same scent of sap and wet earth. But once a place had shown you one secret, you started to suspect it had more. They parked near the washed-out access point and went in on foot. Silas led for a while, with Mara behind him reading the land, and Rook moving ahead in a loose, controlled line. The German shepherd's ears flicked constantly, catching sounds too small to matter to human hearing. Twice he paused to sniff the ground, then moved on. Silas had worked with dogs long enough to know the difference between confusion and process. Rook wasn't uncertain. He was sorting. The ambulance sat where they had left it, half swallowed by root and vine, as if the forest had changed its mind overnight and tried to bury it deeper. Mara stopped when she saw it in full daylight. Whatever reserve she carried in town loosened for the first time. Jesus, she murmured. Silas watched her face instead of the vehicle. You believe me now? I believed you yesterday, she said softly. I just didn't understand how something this big stayed hidden. Rook moved past the ambulance without hesitation. Silas straightened. He's got something. The dog pushed through a wall of ferns to the east, moving faster now. Silas and Mara followed over uneven ground, ducking under low branches and stepping around deadfall silvered by age. After 50 yards, Rook stopped at the base of a thick cedar and began pawing at the earth. Silas exchanged a look with Mara. Then he crouched and started digging with his folding knife and gloved hands. Mara joined him, clearing leaves and dark soil. The smell hit first. Old rot. Not human. Animal. A few more minutes confirmed it. A deer carcass, long dead and half absorbed by the earth, ribs exposed beneath a blanket of roots and damp leaves. Silas sat back on his heels and let out a breath through his nose. Mara wiped dirt from her fingers. So the miracle dog got one wrong. Silas looked at Rook. The dog had stepped back now, head lowered slightly, not ashamed exactly, but unsettled. His nostrils flared. He glanced once at the cedar, then back toward the ambulance, as if annoyed that the ground had lied to him. Silas rose and brushed off his hands. Good, he said quietly. Mara looked at him. Good? It means he's still a dog, Silas said. Not a magic trick. For a second she said nothing. Then she smiled. A small, real smile this time. Fair enough. They returned to the ambulance, but something in the rhythm had changed. The wrong turn had done its work. It made the forest harder to trust, made the search feel less like fate and more like labor. That mattered. Truth that came too easily often felt false. Back at the vehicle, Rook circled once, twice, nose low. Then he froze by the rear corner, angled not toward the roadless slope they had just searched, but downhill, west, where the ground dipped and the trees thinned in ragged intervals. Silas saw the shift instantly. There. Rook moved again. This time he did not hurry. He tracked in a careful zigzag, pausing every 10 feet, adjusting, crossing the same scent line until it strengthened. Mara followed with growing concentration, using broken vegetation and old drainage lines to predict where someone on foot might have gone years ago. The land opened without warning into the skeleton of a creek bed. Once it had carried water. Now it was mostly dry, just a narrow scar of pale stones and mud-dark banks with a thread of moisture glinting in the deepest places. Fallen branches lay across it like snapped bones. Rook went down first, slipping lightly into the creek bed, and stopped near the exposed roots of a toppled birch. He nosed once beneath the roots, then pawed. Silas crouched beside him and reached into the black pocket of earth. His hand found synthetic fabric. He pulled free a weatherproof bag, stiff with age but still sealed along one edge. Mud clung to it in dark sheets. Mara knelt on the opposite side, her breath shallow with the kind of attention that becomes almost reverent. "Open it carefully," she said. Silas peeled it apart. Inside lay a small notebook wrapped in waxed cloth, a few folded papers, and the broken remains of a pen. He unwrapped the notebook. The cover was soft from moisture, but the interior pages had survived better than they should have. Tight handwriting filled them, sometimes neat, sometimes slanting hard across the page, as if written while moving or afraid. "Hannah," Mara whispered. Silas turned the first readable page. He did not read it aloud right away. His eyes moved over the lines, and something in his expression darkened, not with surprise, but with confirmation, the kind that hurt more. "What?" Mara asked. Silas swallowed once. "She says she didn't take him." He turned another page. "She says they were trying to stop her before she could get the boy out." Mara's face lost color under the morning light. Silas kept reading, slower now. Hannah wrote of fear, of changing routes, of someone following the ambulance before they ever reached the ridge. She wrote that Eli had seen something, heard something, carried something. She never made clear which. She wrote that he kept asking for his mother until he stopped asking. And that silence in a child was more frightening than any scream. Then, on one page marked by a water stain shaped like a palm, Hannah had written a line so hard the pen nearly tore the paper. "I am not running with him. I am running for him." Mara looked away toward the trees, pressing a hand briefly to her mouth. Silas closed the notebook for a moment. He had seen enough false reports in his life to know the smell of a manufactured story. This had that smell all over it now. Rook, who had been standing just beyond them in the dry creek bed, lifted his head sharply and turned toward the slope above. He did not bark. He simply stared. Silas followed his gaze and saw nothing at first, only sunlit trunks and still branches. But then a small piece of fabric, nearly colorless with age, fluttered from a low branch caught in the wind. Not natural, not bark, not leaf, a torn strip of faded white cloth. For one suspended second, it looked almost like a hand trying to wave from the trees. Mara whispered, "That wasn't there when I came through this area last fall." The wind died. The cloth went still. And in that hush, the woods felt less empty than before. They climbed out of the creek and followed the line upslope. The cloth turned out to be a piece of old medical gauze, snagged and hardened by weather until it had become almost part of the branch. That alone might have meant nothing. But 10 yards farther, Rook found the first sign that didn't belong to the forest at all. A flat place in the brush. Too flat. Silas stepped into it and felt the difference under his boots. Compressed ground. Long reclaimed, but once deliberately used. They searched outward in widening circles and found what remained of a small shelter. Not much was left. A few rotted poles collapsed into the undergrowth. Rusted food tins flattened by time. A cracked plastic spoon. Fragments of a wool blanket nearly melted into the dirt. On the inner face of a mossy log, protected from the weather, a shallow mark had been carved with something sharp. A single letter. E. Mara crouched beside it, touching the air an inch from the wood, but not the surface itself. A kid could have done that. Yeah, Silas said. Rook nosed through the remains of the shelter, then stopped at one corner and lay down unexpectedly. Not guarding, not resting. Just settling there with a stillness that made Silas's throat tighten for reasons he didn't care to examine too closely. Mara noticed it too. What's he doing? Silas watched the dog. I think, he said, his voice rougher than before, he's telling us this mattered. They searched the shelter carefully. No bones. No blood-dark stain in the soil. No sign of a violent end. What they found instead were smaller, stranger things. A child-sized shoe sole worn smooth at the edge, an empty cough syrup bottle wrapped in cloth to stop it from rattling, and ashes from an old fire buried so deep that only someone looking for the past would have thought to dig for them. Mara sat back on her heels. If this was theirs, then they stayed here. For at least a few days, Silas said. He pictured it despite himself, a frightened nurse, a sick or exhausted child, a hidden camp above a dry creek while people in town built a lie sturdy enough to outlive them. He hated how easy it was to imagine. They widened the search again, slow and methodical. Rook moved ahead, then doubled back, nose working along the edge of the camp. Silas followed him toward a patch of earth beside an old stump where the soil looked just slightly different in color. He knelt, dug with his hands. At first he found only roots, then metal, small, cold, buried just deep enough to vanish. He pulled it free and wiped the dirt away with his thumb. A sheriff's badge. Old style, heavy, tarnished nearly black except where the edges caught the light. Mara stared. No. Silas turned it over. The engraved name was worn but still readable. Dean Mercer. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The forest did not move. Even the birds seemed to have gone elsewhere. Mara rose slowly to her feet. He was never in the file, she said, almost to herself. Not once. Nolan said the official record only named Hannah, the driver's schedule, the dispatch route. Nothing about Mercer being anywhere near the transport. Silas kept looking at the badge in his palm. A missing child. A vanished ambulance. A hunted nurse. And now a sheriff who had somehow been erased from the story while leaving part of himself in the dirt. Rook stood beside him, silent and steady, watching not the badge, but Silas, as if waiting to see what kind of man he would become now that the lie had finally grown a face. The town of Pine Hollow did not change overnight, but something beneath it had shifted. Silas could feel it the moment he stepped back onto its quiet streets. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was tension, thin as a wire, stretched between people who had spent too many years pretending not to see something standing right in front of them. Rook walked beside him, silent as ever, but his head moved more often now, catching fragments of scent left behind by lives lived too close together. Silas stopped in front of a low, aging structure on the edge of town. Gideon Crow's garage. The place looked like it had been assembled rather than built. Patchwork metal siding, a sagging roof, and a wide, open bay where the shadows inside felt thicker than they should. Tools hung from walls in no particular order, and a single rusted truck sat half dismantled in the center, like a patient waiting for a surgeon who had lost interest. Silas stepped in without knocking. Gideon Crow stood near a workbench, his back slightly hunched, his hands stained permanently dark from decades of grease and oil. He was somewhere in his late 60s, maybe pushing 70, though the lines in his face suggested a man who had aged faster than time intended. His hair was thin and gray, combed back but never fully controlled. A short, uneven beard clung to his jaw, more out of neglect than style. He wore a brown canvas jacket over a faded flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms lined with scars, both old and quiet. He didn't turn right away. "You don't look like you need car work," Gideon said, voice rough but steady. Silas let the silence stretch. "No," he replied. "I don't." That was enough. Gideon turned. His eyes met Silas's for just a second before shifting, small, almost unnoticeable. But Silas had spent too many years reading microseconds of hesitation. Guilt didn't always scream. Sometimes it blinked. Rook moved forward, slow, measured. His nose lowered toward the concrete floor, weaving between scattered bolts, rust flakes, and oil stains that had layered over each other for years. He ignored most of it, until he didn't. The dog stopped near a corner where a pile of scrap metal had been pushed together. Old panels, broken brackets, pieces that had long since lost their purpose. Rook leaned in, inhaled, and then froze. Silas watched him carefully. "Find something?" he asked quietly. Rook didn't move, didn't growl, didn't bark. But his entire body locked into that same precise stillness Silas had seen in the forest. Recognition. Silas stepped closer and crouched, pushing aside a bent piece of metal. Underneath, a small fragment. White paint, chipped and rusted at the edges, faded, but not gone. A red line curved across it, part of a cross. Silas didn't pick it up immediately. He looked at Gideon instead. The old man had gone very still. Too still. "What is it?" Gideon asked. But his voice had changed. It was thinner now, like something inside it had cracked. Silas picked up the fragment, turning it slowly in his fingers. "Funny thing," he said, almost casually. "I saw something like this yesterday. Out in the forest. No accusation, no pressure, just presence." Gideon swallowed. "That's so." Rook took a step closer to Gideon. Not aggressive, not protective, just closer. And Gideon flinched. Not visibly enough for most people, but enough. Silas saw it. And that was when he knew. "You ever been out past the ridge?" Silas asked. Gideon shook his head too quickly. "No reason to?" Silas nodded once. "Yeah," he said softly. "That's what I figured." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was breaking. Gideon turned away, wiping his hands on a rag that didn't clean anything. "You got no business digging up old stories," he muttered. Silas leaned back slightly, resting his weight on his heels. "Depends," he said. "Sometimes old stories aren't done being told." Gideon's shoulders tightened. For a moment, it looked like he might say something. Then, he didn't. Across town, Nolan Pierce stood inside the small sheriff's office, flipping through a box that had not been opened in years. Dust lifted in soft clouds with every movement, catching the light like ghosts that refused to leave. The room smelled of paper, age, and quiet neglect. Nolan was a man built for presence. Early 50s, broad through the chest and shoulders, his face weathered by years of responsibility more than hardship. His hair had turned mostly gray, but his posture still carried authority. Not loud, not forceful, but steady. He had not believed the official story for a long time. He had simply lacked something better to replace it. Until now. He pulled a thin folder from the bottom of the box. Unlabeled. That alone made it wrong. Inside, adoption records. Old, incomplete, but not empty. One name stood out immediately. Caleb Thorne. Nolan frowned, scanning the details. No birth records, no hospital confirmation, just a transfer. A child placed into a foster system under unusual circumstances, flagged, then quietly cleared. Nolan leaned back slowly. "Son of a," he muttered under his breath, because the timeline matched. Too well. Later that afternoon, Silas stood at the edge of a quiet clearing just beyond town. Rook had led him here without hesitation. A small house sat at the far end. Simple, worn, but cared for. Not abandoned, not forgotten. Just lived in quietly. Silas hadn't knocked yet. He didn't need to, because Rook had already stopped, and for the first time since they had started this journey. The dog did not move forward. He lowered himself slowly to the ground. Not in submission, not in fear, but in something deeper. Recognition, without certainty. Silas felt it too. That strange pull between truth and doubt. Like standing in front of a door that might open, or might never have belonged to you at all. Caleb Thorne opened the door before Silas could knock. He looked younger than Silas expected. Late 20s, maybe pushing 30. Lean build, not weak, but not hardened either. His face carried sharp lines softened by time rather than experience. His skin pale compared to most men in Pine Hollow, like someone who worked more indoors than out. His hair was dark brown, slightly too long, falling loosely around his forehead, and his eyes, hazel, restless, moved quickly, as if always searching for something that refused to stay still. There was something else in him too, something unfinished. "You've been standing there a while," Caleb said. His voice wasn't hostile, but it wasn't welcoming either. Silas nodded once. "Didn't want to interrupt?" "You're not," Caleb replied. "You're just not saying why you're here." "Fair enough." Silas gestured slightly toward Rook. "My dog wanted to come." Caleb's gaze dropped to the German shepherd. For a brief second, something flickered. Then it was gone. "I'm not really a dog person," Caleb said flatly. Rook didn't react. He stayed where he was, lying calmly, watching. Silas studied Caleb carefully. "You ever hear the name Eli Morrow?" The change was immediate. Not dramatic, but real. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. His fingers curled just a fraction at his sides. Then he shook his head. "No. Too fast, too clean." Silas let the silence stretch again. "You sure?" Caleb's eyes hardened. "I said no." There it was. Not confusion, not curiosity, defensiveness. Silas stepped forward once, slow enough not to threaten, but deliberate enough to matter. "You were adopted," he said quietly. Caleb's expression snapped. "Get off my property." Silas didn't move. "You don't have birth records," he continued. "No hospital file, no original name. I said get off my property." The anger came fast now. Sharp, uncontrolled, real. Silas raised his hand slightly, not backing down but not escalating. "I'm not here to hurt you." "Then leave," Caleb shot back, "because whatever you think you're digging into, it's not me." Silas studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right." He turned, started to walk away. Rook remained where he was. Caleb noticed. "Call your dog," he said. Silas didn't. Instead, he watched. Because Rook wasn't refusing. He was choosing. The dog slowly stood, took one step forward, then stopped. Not close enough to touch, not far enough to leave. He lowered himself again. Right there, in front of Caleb. Caleb's breath hitched, barely noticeable, but real. His eyes flicked down. For just a second, too long. Something inside him shifted. A tremor, small, but undeniable. Then he turned away sharply. "I don't know what you think this is," he muttered, voice tighter now. "But you're wrong." Silas said nothing, because sometimes truth didn't need words. It just needed time. Rook finally stood and returned to Silas's side. As they walked away, neither of them looked back. But behind them, inside that small house, Caleb stood frozen in place, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. And somewhere deep in his memory, a sound stirred. Not clear, not complete, but enough. A voice, shouting, urgent, panicked. "Mercer, don't shoot!" Caleb closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he didn't know why his heart was racing. The confession did not come easily. It came like rust breaking, slow, painful, inevitable. Silas returned to Gideon's garage just before dusk, when the town softened into long shadows and fewer questions. The air smelled of oil and cooling metal, but beneath it now, faint, almost gone, was something else. Fear. Gideon Crow stood exactly where Silas had left him the day before. But he looked older. Not in years. In weight. His shoulders sagged, his eyes hollowed slightly, as if something inside him had finally decided it was too tired to keep hiding. Rook stepped inside first, silent, his posture calm but alert. He did not search this time. He did not need to. Whatever truth lived here had already begun to surface. Silas closed the distance slowly. "I didn't come here to fight you," he said. Gideon let out a dry laugh. "Doesn't matter why you came," he muttered. "You're already too far in." Silas didn't respond, because that part was true. Gideon turned, his back facing the open bay, eyes drifting somewhere past the walls of his own life. "You ever carry something so long?" he said quietly. "You forget what it felt like before it was there?" Silas leaned against the edge of the workbench, arms relaxed, but ready. "Yeah," he said. Gideon nodded once. "Then you know." Silence stretched, then broke. It wasn't supposed to be like that. The words came out low, uneven. "Mercer. He wasn't a monster at the start. None of them were." Silas didn't interrupt. Gideon kept going. There was a fund, medical relief, small-town support. People donated, trusted it. Mercer and a few others, they saw an opportunity, money moving through channels nobody really checked. He rubbed his hands together, as if trying to clean something that had never left. At first it was just skimming. Then it got bigger. Shell accounts, redirected supplies, ghost patients. The kind of thing that doesn't hurt anyone, until it does. Silas's voice was quiet. "And Eli's mother?" Gideon's jaw tightened. "She found it." That was all it took. The shape of the story snapped into place. "She wasn't supposed to," Gideon continued. "But she did. She worked admin, saw numbers that didn't line up, started asking questions, real ones." He exhaled slowly. "They warned her to stop." Silas didn't need to ask what happened next. Gideon said it anyway. She didn't. The garage felt colder. "Mercer made the call," Gideon whispered. "Said it was necessary." Said if the whole thing came down, it would take the town with it. Jobs, funding, everything. Silas's eyes hardened slightly. So they killed her. Gideon didn't answer. He didn't have to. And Hannah? Silas asked. Gideon's eyes flickered. She wasn't part of it, he said. That's what made it worse. He stepped away from the bench, pacing slowly now, like movement might help him breathe. She saw what happened. Not everything. Just enough. And she knew Eli was next. Silas felt something tighten in his chest. So she ran. Gideon nodded. She took the ambulance, grabbed the boy, tried to get him out before Mercer could clean it up. And the crash? Gideon stopped, turned. His eyes met Silas's. It wasn't a crash, he said. The words landed heavy. It was staged. Silas didn't move, didn't blink. Gideon continued, voice steadier now that the worst of it had been said. They intercepted her near the ridge, forced her off-road, made it look like she lost control. But she didn't die there. Silas's voice dropped. She got away. For a while, Gideon said. That silence again. The kind that held everything that wasn't spoken. And Mercer? Silas asked. Gone, Gideon replied. Officially dead a few years later. Unofficially. He shook his head. Men like him don't disappear. They shift. Silas thought of the badge. Buried, hidden, but not lost. And Victor Kane? Silas asked. Gideon's expression darkened. He's what comes after, he said. Cleaner, smarter, doesn't get his hands dirty unless he has to. Silas waited. He didn't start the system, Gideon added, but he inherited it, expanded it. It's not just money anymore. What is it? Gideon looked at him. Control. The word settled like dust that would never fully clear. Healthcare, supplies, records. People don't realize how much power sits in deciding who gets help and who doesn't. Silas straightened slightly. And Pine Hollow? Is part of it, Gideon said. Silas returned to his cabin just after nightfall. The forest around it stood still. Too still. Rook noticed it first. His ears lifted, his body lowered. Not aggression, awareness. Silas stepped inside and stopped. The door wasn't broken, the windows weren't shattered. But something had changed, subtly, precisely. The kind of disturbance only someone trained would notice. His pack had been moved, just slightly. He crossed the room in 3 silent steps and opened it. Empty. The notebook. Hannah's journal. Gone. Silas exhaled slowly. Not anger, not panic, just calculation. Rook circled once, nose low, tracking. He paused near the door, then moved outside. Silas followed. The scent trail was faint, but real. Rubber, oil, vehicle, fresh. Rook followed it a few yards, then stopped. Completely. He didn't continue, didn't chase. Instead, he turned, not back toward the road, but toward the forest. Silas frowned. That's not where they went. Rook held his gaze, then moved, fast. They pushed through the trees at a pace just short of running, branches snapping underfoot, breath steady but tight. The forest seemed to close around them as they moved deeper, shadows thickening as the last light of day slipped away. After 10 minutes, the shape emerged. A structure, low, concrete, forgotten. An old medical outpost. The kind built decades ago for emergencies that never came, or came too often and were better left unspoken. Mara's voice echoed in Silas's memory. Some places don't stay on maps forever. This was one of them. The door hung half open. Rook didn't hesitate. He went inside. The air was stale, heavy, unmoved for years. Dust coated everything. Beds, cabinets, broken equipment. The smell of antiseptic lingered faintly beneath decay, like something that refused to fully die. Silas moved carefully, scanning. No recent footprints, no obvious signs of intrusion. Except Rook. The dog stood at the far wall, still, focused. Silas approached. The wall looked solid, concrete, unbroken, but Rook didn't move. Silas pressed his hand against it, tapped, hollow. He searched the edges, found it, a seam, barely visible. He pushed, nothing, then harder. A section shifted, slowly, silently, revealing a narrow space behind it. A hidden room, inside, files, stacks of them, boxes, organized, preserved, not abandoned, maintained. Silas stepped in slowly, his eyes adjusting. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. Records, real ones, names, dates, transactions. People who had been erased from official systems, but not forgotten here. Mara would have called it evidence. Silas called it truth. Then, he saw it. A small recorder, old, battery compartment cracked, but intact. He picked it up, pressed the button. For a moment, nothing. Then, static, and a voice, weak, shaking, alive. Hannah, if anyone finds this... The recording cut slightly, returned. They're lying, all of them. Mercer. He... Static swallowed the words. Then, clear again. He said the boy wouldn't remember. But he's wrong. Eli saw the recording cut. Silas stood frozen, the weight of it settling in, not just what had happened, but what had been buried, and why. Behind him, Rook sat down slowly, watching, waiting. Because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous than either of them had planned to uncover. The forest no longer felt like a place to search. It felt like a place that had been waiting. Silas stood at the edge of the abandoned medical outpost as dawn bled slowly through the trees. The recording still echoed faintly in his mind. Hannah's voice, fragile but unbroken, threading through years of silence. Rook stood beside him, unmoving. Not restless, not uncertain, just certain. Silas clipped the leash to his collar, more out of habit than necessity. All right, he said quietly. Show me. Rook didn't hesitate. He moved. They went deeper than before, past the creek, past the broken shelter, past the places where the past had left fragments behind. This was different. The terrain shifted subtly, rising into uneven ground scattered with stone formations, half swallowed by moss and time. The trees grew thicker here, their trunks older, wider, their branches woven so tightly overhead that sunlight only slipped through in fractured pieces. Silas felt it, that quiet pull. Not instinct, not logic, something else. The kind of direction that didn't come from maps. Mara caught up halfway through the climb, breathing slightly heavier but steady. She hadn't asked questions this time. Whatever doubt she had carried before was gone, replaced by something stronger. Belief. You didn't tell me where we were going, she said. Silas glanced ahead at Rook. I didn't know, he replied. That seemed to be enough. The stone structure revealed itself slowly. At first it looked like nothing more than a natural outcrop. Rock stacked against rock, uneven, worn. But as they moved closer, the shape became deliberate. A shelter, hidden, not built in the open, but carved into what already existed. A stone cabin, low, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Mara exhaled softly. No one's ever mapped this. Silas nodded. That's the point. Rook approached the entrance and stopped. Not blocking, not warning, waiting. Inside, the air was cool and still, preserved in a way the outside world wasn't. Dust covered most surfaces, but not evenly. Some areas had been disturbed long after the rest had settled. Silas stepped in first. His eyes adjusted quickly. Then, he saw it. A makeshift living space. Small, tight, but real. Blankets layered over stone, empty containers arranged neatly along one wall, a crude sleeping area built with care, not desperation. This hadn't been a place someone passed through. This had been a place someone stayed. For a long time. Mara moved slowly behind him, her voice barely above a whisper. She survived. Silas didn't answer. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than anything else. Rook moved deeper into the cabin, his nose guiding him to the far corner. He nudged something gently, then stepped back. Silas crouched. A metal tin. Sealed. Not buried, not hidden. Just placed. Like it had been meant to be found. He opened it. Inside, pages. Carefully folded, protected. The last pieces of a story that had refused to disappear. Silas unfolded the top sheet. The handwriting was weaker now, less steady, but still unmistakably hers. He read it silently. Then again, slower. I can't stay close anymore. They're still looking. I see him sometimes. From a distance. He's alive. That's enough. Mara pressed her hand to her chest, her eyes glassing slightly. Silas turned the page. If anyone finds this, if he lives, don't tell him everything. Don't make him carry it. The last line cut deeper than the rest. If he lives, don't let him become me. Silas lowered the paper slowly. The cabin felt smaller now, not physically, emotionally, like it couldn't hold the weight of what had been left behind. Behind him, a sound. Not movement, not a step, a breath. Silas turned. Caleb stood in the doorway. He looked different. Not angry, not defensive, just empty. His eyes moved across the cabin slowly, taking in every detail, every trace of a life that had once existed just out of his reach. His shoulders trembled slightly, though he didn't seem to notice. You found it, he said. His voice didn't carry emotion. That was the problem. Silas stood. We didn't bring you here, he said carefully. Caleb shook his head once. No, he replied. You didn't. His gaze drifted to the papers in Silas's hand. She stayed, he said. Not a question, a realization. Mara stepped forward slightly. She protected you, she said softly. Caleb let out a small, broken laugh. Protected me, he repeated. He stepped inside, slow, uncertain, like he wasn't sure the ground would hold. I lived, he said. The words came out hollow. That's what matters, right? No one answered, because they all knew. That wasn't the whole truth. Caleb's hand brushed against the stone wall as he moved deeper into the cabin. For a brief second, his fingers froze, his breath caught. Not from memory, from something deeper. A sensation. Familiar, unplaceable. He closed his eyes, and in that silence, a fragment surfaced. Not a clear image, not a full memory, just a feeling. Cold stone. A woman's voice, softer now. Closer. Not afraid, not running, waiting. His eyes snapped open. "I've been here before." The words barely left his lips. But they changed everything. Silas watched him carefully. Not pushing, not guiding, just present. Because this wasn't about uncovering truth anymore. It was about facing it. The sound of tires on dirt broke the moment. All three of them turned. Rook moved instantly, stepping forward, body lowering, not aggressive, but ready. Silas stepped outside. A black SUV rolled to a stop just beyond the trees. The engine shut off. The door opened. Victor Kane stepped out. He didn't look like a man under pressure. He looked composed, deliberate, like someone who had already calculated every outcome and accepted them all. Victor was in his late 40s, tall, lean, his posture straight in a way that came not from discipline, but control. His dark hair was touched with early silver at the temples, styled with care that never crossed into vanity. His face was sharp, angular, his eyes calm, but empty in a way that made them harder to read than anger ever could. His coat, charcoal, tailored for function more than show, moved slightly with the wind. He stepped forward without hesitation. "You've gone further than I expected," he said. His voice was smooth, measured, not defensive, not aggressive, just certain. Silas stepped down from the cabin entrance. "You came to stop it?" Victor shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "I came to remind you." He looked past Silas, at Caleb, at the cabin, at everything they had uncovered. "The truth doesn't save people," Victor said quietly. "It dismantles them." Caleb stepped forward, his hands no longer trembling, his voice steadier now. "You let her die." Victor met his gaze. "I let the system survive," he corrected. Silence. Heavy. Final. The standoff didn't explode. It shifted. Gideon arrived moments later, breathless but determined, standing beside Nolan Pierce, who had come not as a lawman, but as a man who had finally chosen a side. Gideon spoke first, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly, and that was enough. Nolan stepped forward, badge in hand. "Victor Kane," he said, "you're done." Victor didn't move, didn't resist, because men like him didn't panic. They calculated. The shot came anyway. Not from Victor, from the trees. A last attempt. A desperate act. Silas moved, but not fast enough. The gunfire cracked through the forest, and Rook stepped forward. The impact was small, quick, but enough. The bullet struck his shoulder, deflecting slightly as his body shifted. Not fatal, but real. He didn't fall. He didn't retreat. He stood, between Caleb and the past that had tried to kill him twice. Everything after that happened fast. Nolan's team moved. The shooter was taken. Victor didn't run, didn't speak, didn't need to. Because for the first time, control had slipped. Silas knelt beside Rook, his hands steady, his voice low. "You're all right," he said. Rook's breathing was controlled, eyes focused, still there, always there. Caleb stood a few feet away, watching, not the blood, not the chaos, just the dog. And something inside him broke, not from fear, from understanding. The forest did not change when the truth came out. It did not brighten. It did not soften. It remained what it had always been, vast, indifferent, patient. But the people within it, they did. The official statement came quietly. No ceremony, no crowd. Just a document read aloud in a room that had once held too many silences. Hannah Vale's name was cleared. Not rewritten, not softened. Cleared. The words felt heavier than they should have, like something that had taken too long to arrive and now didn't quite know where to settle. Mara stood near the back of the room, her arms folded loosely, her face unreadable in that calm, steady way she carried. Nolan Pierce stood at the front, voice firm but not loud, reading from the paper as if saying the words carefully might somehow make up for the years they had been withheld. Gideon sat in the corner. He did not look up. Not once. Silas leaned against the wall, quiet, his presence more shadow than man. He didn't need to stand in the light for this. This wasn't his moment. It never had been. Rook sat beside him, his posture relaxed for the first time in days. The bandage wrapped around his shoulder was clean, carefully done. The wound had been shallow, lucky in a way that didn't feel like luck. The dog's eyes moved slowly across the room, not searching, not tracking, just observing. There was no grave, no marked place where Hannah Vale could be found, no final certainty to anchor her story. Only pieces, a cabin, a journal, a voice captured in static, and the absence of a body that left too many questions unanswered. Mara had said it best the night before. Sometimes the forest keeps what it's given. Silas had not argued, because he understood that better than most. The apology came later, not official, not written, spoken, one by one, in quiet voices that didn't expect forgiveness but needed to say the words anyway. People who had looked away, people who had chosen silence over discomfort. People who had believed the easier version of the story because it didn't ask anything from them. They came to Caleb. Not all at once, not together, but steadily. Caleb Thorne stood outside the small cabin at the edge of the clearing, tools in his hands, wood dust settling on his sleeves like a second skin. The place had changed in subtle ways over the past few days. The broken step had been replaced. The door frame straightened. A section of the roof patched carefully, not to perfection, but to hold. He worked without urgency, without pressure, just consistently. When the first person approached him, he didn't stop, didn't look up, didn't react. He let them speak. Let the apology sit in the air. Then nodded once. Nothing more. He did not accept. He did not reject. He simply carried it. Silas watched from a distance, not hiding, not intruding, just present. He had seen this before, in different forms, in different places. People trying to reconcile with something that had already shaped them. The problem was, some things didn't change when you understood them. They just became clearer. Caleb paused in his work that afternoon, resting his hands on the rough edge of a wooden beam. His gaze drifted toward the forest line, where the trees stood in their quiet, endless patience. Silas approached slowly, Rook at his side. "You're fixing it," Silas said. Caleb nodded. It was falling apart. Silas glanced at the structure. "You could have left." Caleb let out a faint breath. "Yeah," he said. "I could have." But he hadn't. There was a stillness between them that didn't need to be filled. Silas had questions. He chose not to ask them. Caleb had answers. He chose not to give them, because some truths didn't need to be spoken twice. "You keeping the name?" Silas asked after a while. Caleb's jaw shifted slightly. "Which one?" he replied. Silas didn't answer. Caleb let out a quiet, almost humorless breath. "I'm not throwing either of them away," he said. "That wouldn't make sense." Silas nodded once. It was the only answer that ever would have. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the forest turned gold at its edges, Silas stood alone near the path that led out of Pine Hollow. The road stretched ahead, open, waiting. Rook sat beside him, still, calm, not pulling forward, not urging him to move. For the first time since they had begun this journey, the dog did not guide him, did not choose for him. Silas looked down at him. Rook met his gaze, and in that quiet exchange, there was no command, no direction, only a question. One Silas had not allowed himself to consider until now. What happens when there's nowhere left to run from? The wind moved softly through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a hammer struck wood, steady, rhythmic. Caleb, building something, not from the past, but beside it. Victor Kane had been taken without resistance. The system he had inherited and expanded was already unraveling. Files pulled from the hidden room began to surface, names reappearing where they had once been erased. Nolan worked longer hours than he admitted, his shoulders carrying a different kind of weight now. Not authority, but responsibility. Gideon testified. Every detail, every lie, every moment he had chosen silence. It did not redeem him, but it mattered, because truth, once spoken, didn't disappear again so easily. Mara continued her patrols through the forest, though her routes had changed. She moved slower now in certain places, as if acknowledging something unseen, something earned. When she passed the ridge, she sometimes stopped, not to search, not to find, but simply to stand. Respect. Silas understood that too. The town did not heal overnight. It did not transform into something new. It remained flawed, human. But something inside it had shifted, a tension released, a silence broken. And sometimes that was enough. Silas stood at the edge of the road as the light faded completely. The world beyond Pine Hollow waited. Other towns, other roads, other ghosts that had always been his path. Move on. Don't stay long enough to belong anywhere. Don't let anything anchor you, because anchors could be lost. And losing them hurt more than leaving ever did. Rook didn't move. He simply sat. Beside him, present. Silas took a breath, slow, measured. He looked down the road, then back toward the forest, toward the cabin, toward the quiet sound of someone rebuilding something that had never truly been his to lose. He stepped forward, once, then stopped. He didn't turn his back on the road, but he didn't walk it either. And for the first time in a long while, Silas Wren allowed himself to remain. Not forever, not permanently, just long enough. Rook shifted slightly beside him, not leading, not following, just staying, and, in the distance, under the fading light, Caleb Thorne stood at the doorway of the cabin, one hand resting against the frame, his silhouette steady against the quiet breath of the forest, not who he had been, not only who he was told to be, but something in between, something whole. There are moments in life when the truth arrives too late to fix what was broken. It cannot bring people back. It cannot undo pain. And yet somehow, it still matters. Because truth is not just about justice, it is about light. And light, no matter how small, is never meaningless. Maybe the miracle in this story was not that everything was saved. Maybe the miracle was that, after years of silence, the truth still found a way to be heard. That a man who had every reason to keep walking stopped. That a dog who could not speak still led the way. That a life once buried was finally seen. Sometimes God does not change the past, but He places something in our path, a moment, a person, a quiet instinct, that leads us exactly where we need to be. Not to erase the pain, but to give it meaning. Not to fix everything, but to remind us that nothing is ever completely lost. In your own life, there may be things you carry that no one else sees. Questions without answers, wounds without closure. But maybe, just maybe, there is a reason you are still here. A reason you are still moving forward. And maybe the miracle is not what you are waiting for, but what is already walking beside you, guiding you in ways you do not yet understand. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell us what part stayed with you. And if you believe in stories of hope, truth, and the quiet bond between humans and animals, subscribe to the channel Veteran Dog Stories so you never miss the next journey. May God watch over you, guide your steps, and bring light into the places in your life that feel uncertain. And may you always find the strength to keep going, even when the road ahead is unclear.